When it comes to deciding who was responsible for a particular music genre, there will always be disagreement, leading to argument. Who was the greatest influence, and when and where did it happen? Hard rock is no exception. However, if you listen to many successful bands of the 80s and 90s, one name seems to crop up more often than any other: Deep Purple. The band who bridged the gap between happy-go-lucky 60s pop and 70s heavy rock. 30 years in the business, with time out here and there, occasional changes of personnel, and multi-million selling albums along the way, give Purple all the credibility they need. At the outset in 1967, however, things didn't look very promising. Chris Curtis, the ex-Searchers drummer, asked the boss of Alice Edwards Gowns, a rag trade company, to manage a new group he wanted to put together. Tony Edwards invited a friend, John Coletta, an advertising consultant, to join him in this new venture. They had no experience whatsoever in the turbulent world of rock, as John Lord remembers.
They didn't. They had absolutely no experience. Tony Edwards wanted a band. It was a kind of almost, I don't think he'll hate me for saying, it was almost like a plaything. He'd been spoken to by Chris Curtis, the Searchers drummer, about this concept that he had for a band which was going to be called Roundabout. And Chris Curtis, that is, had got me involved and said he'd got this wonderful guitarist who was going to be along, and it would just be the three of us, and we would be the core of this Roundabout. And then the reason it would be called Roundabout is because people would jump on and jump off as we chose to have them in the band. He'd sold that idea to Tony Edwards, who thought it was a great idea. Chris Curtis then disappeared into the woodwork in some way, leaving me not knowing what the heck was going on. And I got a telegram out of the blue from Tony Edwards. Are you still interested? Can't find Chris Curtis. Are you still interested? To me. So I said, yeah, because I thought at this time that Tony Edwards knew everything there was to know about running a pop group. He knew everything there was to know about running a firm that made dresses, I think. And John Coletta was the guy who worked in the advertising agency upstairs and seemed like a bit of a hot pistol to Tony, you know. So would you like to come and manage a band with me? He said John to Tony, or Tony to John, and off they went.
We got a man drink of roots. It's a thunder in my brain. Yeah, I feed it to my baby. She thunders just the same. Food of love sets a flame. I stick it up.
Nick Semper would be playing bass with Screaming Lord Sutch and the Pirates, Johnny Kidd's band, and had survived the tragic road accident in which Kidd had died. In the summer of 1967, Semper was playing for Billy Davis in Hamburg, and it was there that he heard and befriended an amazing guitar talent, one Ritchie Blackmore. By the autumn of that year, Semper had joined the Flower Pot Men alongside John Lord, and lost no time in singing Blackmore's praises to anybody who would listen. It was only natural, therefore, that when the question arose of who should play guitar in the new band, the name Lord pushed for was Ritchie Blackmore. Edwards and Coletta were even persuaded to pay for his air ticket from Hamburg.
Yeah, I had been told by Chris Curtis that this guy living in Hamburg, an Englishman, name of Ritchie Blackmore, was stunning. And I had no personal knowledge of that, so I asked around and found out that the guy's name was, that people raved about him. Apparently, in a time when technical ability was almost a watchword more than emotional ability, Ritchie apparently played very fast, so they said, as if this was some kind of great thing, but that he'd gone to Germany to chill out because he found England unhelpful and all this kind of stuff. So I was very intrigued. The name Blackmore, it had a sort of a ring to it. And so I'd said, well, if Chris Curtis thought this guy was good, at least I better meet him. But I had about 4 shillings in my pocket at the time, so I couldn't pay for his air ticket from Hamburg. So Tony agreed to pay for him to come over. And in December '67 he did. Knocked on my door, we met, wrote 2 songs that night, which were the first 2 songs, or the first and the last song on the first album, I believe. And that started that particular partnership.
From the very beginning, Roundabout were true to their name. They just kept going round in circles. Curtis's ideas became even more manic and things just fell apart. Blackmore departed in disgust to Hamburg, and Lord stayed with the Flowerpots, who decamped to Munich. It all seemed over before it had started. But Edwards and Coletta hadn't given up. In early 1968, they sent a telegram to John Lord, asking if he would be interested in being the linchpin of a new band, which they were still prepared to back and manage. John, obviously tiring of flower power, accepted. In the unlikely setting of Deeves Hall, an unprepossessing farmhouse near South Mimms in Hertfordshire, rented for £50 a month by Edwards and Coletta, auditions and rehearsals took place over the next 3 months. The nucleus was already in place, with Ritchie having been persuaded to return once again from Hamburg, and Nick Simper following Lord's move from the Flowerpots. What they needed was a vocalist and a drummer. With an ad running in the Melody Maker, they saw dozens, including Rod Stewart, but what finally decided them was a twist of fate, as Ian Pace relates.
Well, it goes back a year before Deep Purple. The band I was in was travelling over to Italy to do a 3-month stint in Milan, providing music for an Arnold Wesker play, and Blackmore was on the same boat over to Hamburg. He was a bit of a name at the time, so we all introduced ourselves. And after this 3-month stint in Milan, which drove everybody crazy, we had a 3-week engagement at the Star Club in Hamburg, which is where Ritchie was living. And we had a great time there, but whatever I did, Ritchie must have enjoyed, because a year later, when Rod Evans, the singer in the band I was with, applied for the job with the band that would become Deep Purple, Ritchie put 2 and 2 together and said, he's still got the drummer. And Rod said, yeah, of course. We said, bring him along. We'll try and sneak him in, and because they had a guy called Bobby Woodman in there at the time, who was penciled in for the drum spot, but it really wasn't happening for everybody. So I did sneak along there, and they sent Bobby off to get a packet of cigarettes or something. So I jumped on his kit and nicked his gig. But it all went back to those 3 weeks in Hamburg, where I first apparently impressed Ritchie.
The newly formed Roundabout was now complete, and left Deeves Hall with a 45-minute set worked out and a bill for £75 for dilapidations, which was small in comparison with other rock band successes at that time. A salesman from Brighton, Ronald Heyer, joined the Edwards-Coletta setup, and HEC was formed to deal with what the management team hoped would be serious money-making. Ritchie Blackmore had introduced Tony Edwards to record producer Derek Lawrence, and the result was to prove better than any of them could ever have hoped. Derek Lawrence.
Basically, I went down to Deeves Hall. Then we did a couple of demos, which I took to Roy first and then EMI. And Roy said, yes, we're signing. And through my contact with Ben Nesbitt at Feldman's, who became the publisher, he knew Artie Mogul from the Bob Dylan deal originally. And he had said, Artie Mogul at Tetragrammaton had said to Ben, get that skinny kid who sits on your radiator to produce something for our new label. And the tape we sent out was Deep Purple.
Hey Joe, where you going with that gun in your hand? Hey Joe, now tell me where you going with that gun in your hand? Down to shoot my lady.
With a record contract in the bag on both sides of the Atlantic, Roundabout now embarked on their first tour, to Denmark. Their arrival was hardly auspicious, as their work permits were invalid and the local police took an unhealthy interest in them. John Lord.
Yeah, we arrived at Esbjerg on the west coast of Denmark after the all-night ferry, which had been flung about across the North Sea in usual North Sea fashion. We arrived in the grey morning, cold, and walked straight into these extremely officious customs officers come police, who put us in the back of a van where they usually put dogs. You know, that sort of chained off bit in the back of a police car. which is usually where they put the police Alsatians. Well, that's where they put us and took us to the local Nick, where we were held pending the arrival of our permits, which were brought very much later by a very small, flustered Dane called Walter Clable, who had a scar on his face, like a dueling scar. I later found out he'd ran into a tree when he was a kid, but he had a little goatee beard, and he looked like he'd been at Heidelberg University and should have, been a crazy fencer. But he was a great young promoter, and he really did well for Purple. He promoted the Artwoods when I was in that band, so that's how we ended up with him.
Apart from all the usual rock band antics like removing the hotel's fire escape doors to let in female company and jolly visits to the Tuborg beer factory to sample the product, the tour was notable for one very important decision, as Ian Pace remembers.
Well, when we went to Denmark for the first little attempted tour, we called ourselves Roundabout. It was a leftover from Chris Curtis's involvement when he had an idea that people would just jump in and out of the band and not have a fixed lineup. But we never really thought about a serious name at that point because nobody knew if it was really going to work on stage. And as far as I can remember, after a few beverages and a lot of laughter, the subject of names somehow came up. And I vaguely remember Richie saying that one of his aunties used to play piano quite badly, and one of her favourite songs was the old April Stevens Nino Temper thing, Deep Purple. He said the words sound nice together, and nobody else could come up with anything better, so it sort of stuck. And by the time we got back to England, we decided that's what it would be.
Deep Purple recorded their first album at Pye Studios, London in May 1968. The financial risk entailed in recording a new band has always been great, and the risks have to be minimised. But in the light of all their future recordings, Shades of Deep Purple was strictly bargain basement as far as the studio costs and Derek Lawrence were concerned.
We recorded it on the Saturday and I mixed it on the Sunday. That was it. And half that time was overdubbing sound effects at the end of each track. Because in those days, when you would take in sort of BBC radio sound effects, no one was using those in studios, and that's what we did.
Derek Lawrence was not instrumental in choosing the single off the album. If he and the group had had their way, it would have been Help. But Tetragrammaton in the States insisted on Purple's cover of Joe Salt's classic Hush.
So fine, she's the best girl that I ever had. Sometimes she's gonna make me feel so bad.
Fortunately, the Americans knew their market, and Hush reached number 4 in the Billboard charts, with the album peaking at 24. The single was also a success over most of Europe, but for some reason it fell on deaf ears in the UK. Perhaps with hindsight, it was a mistake to embark on a series of live dates in England, culminating in the Sunbury Festival in the late summer of '68. It wasn't a happy experience, as John Lord remembers.
It was awful. I think the phrase, we died a death. I think what we were doing was good. I don't think there was any problem with what we were playing. It's just that it had nothing to do with what anybody else was playing. And the Sunbury Jazz and Blues Festival, as it was then, people were very conscious of being musical, and pulling deeply on various kinds of cigarettes as they expounded their views on music. And we didn't fit in, I don't think, to any of those particular areas. It was also the festival, I believe, where Arthur Brown ran onto the stage and did his opening, "I am the god of hellfire, and I bring you," and a voice went, "No you don't, Arthur," with his head on fire, right? And he was all ready to get going, but something hadn't gone quite right, and the voice was of his stage manager, which unfortunately was standing too close to a mic. So "I am the god of hellfire and I bring you, no you don't, Arthur," was not really what he was looking for the beginning of his act, as his head slowly burned.
Now Tetragrammaton was screaming for new product, and Derek Lawrence took Purple into Delane Lee's studios in London to record The Book of Taliesin. To coincide with the release in the States, Lawrence and the band flew out to Los Angeles. The bizarre lifestyle and extravagances of the Tetragrammaton directors impressed the lads from London, not least Ian Pace.
Well, the first time we saw the Tetragrammaton offices, which was basically it was owned by three guys, and they were Campbell, Silver, Cosby, one being Bill Cosby, another guy Roy Silver, and then another fellow was Bruce Campbell. The record officers had their own permanent cordon bleu chef all the time. A finely stocked wine cellar, and the most gorgeous secretaries you've ever seen. And it was situated on Rodeo Drive. I mean, you couldn't be wasting more money if you really tried.
Kentucky woman, she shines in her own kind of light. She looks at you once in a day, and what's wrong is alright. And I love her, God knows I love her. Kentucky woman, she gets to know you. She gets to own you. Yes, Kentucky woman.
Kentucky Woman, Deep Purple's second single, was another cover version, this time of a Neil Diamond song. It reached number 38 in the USA in November 1968. The Book of Taliesin peaked at number 54, and quite naturally the band and management were overjoyed, but still wondering when the money would start to come in. The close of that year saw Deep Purple's first American tour. They guested with Cream on their farewell tour, and the opening gig was at the LA Forum in front of 16,000 fans. Cream allegedly took a dislike to Purple, and after the second Forum show dispensed with their services. One of the replacement gigs was with John Lord's longtime heroes, Vanilla Fudge.
We were going down far too well, so we left. We were forced off, and yeah, we did a few gigs again after that with Vanilla Fudge, who we had idolised back in England. I mean, in fact, a lot of the first album and the second album, a lot of the way we did arrangements of stuff was a direct influence from Vanilla Fudge.
In January 1969, the band returned to the UK for a 14-date tour and further sessions with Derek Lawrence for the new album. Up to this point, Purple had been delving into the archives for cover material, encouraged, it has to be said, by Tetragrammaton in the USA. But now, in order to be taken seriously in the UK, they realised original songs and a definitive style were a must. Lord, with his musical education, was particularly interested in orchestral arrangements. This did not sit too well with Ritchie Blackmore. April was taken from the third album entitled Deep Purple, which disappointingly failed to chart in the USA, and the next American tour in April that year can only be described as the Tour from Hell. It wasn't that the audiences weren't receptive, but rather a schism occurred within the band. In a hotel bedroom, John Coletta was faced by a resolute trio of Blackmore, Pace and Lord, who informed him they wanted to sack Rod Evans and Nick Simper. Coletta couldn't understand it, so Lord explained.
Coletta thought, well, it's going so well. And we said, well, it isn't, in fact. Three members of the band want the band to go in a certain direction, and the other two are not seemingly interested in going in that direction.
Coletta insisted that Simper and Evans should be kept in ignorance of this decision, and that the band stay together to complete the remaining American gigs. This they did under enormous strain. On the band's return to England, it was left to Tony Edwards to impart the bad news to the unfortunate pair, but only after a piece of Machiavellian subterfuge had taken place in a recording studio. After a recording session, Simper and Evans and the others packed up and left the studio, only for Lord, Blackmore and Pace to return later on to meet up with two new musicians they'd shortlisted as replacements.
John and Ritchie had gone up to some pub in North London and seen Episode 6 working, at the instigation of Mick Underwood, who was Episode 6's drummer, who knew that we were not happy. And God bless him, Mickey taught himself out of a gig because, you know, episode 6 were both Gillan and Glover, which we decided was worth a go with.
Gloria Bristow, the manager of the Gill and Glover Group Episode 6, served a writ on Edwards and Coletta, accusing them of poaching the two musicians. The dispute was eventually settled out of court, but were Ian and Roger troubled by their consciences? Ian Gillan.
I think conscience and loyalty is an important thing with any band, but there is a time when you get the feeling that you should move on. I had this thought in the back of my mind that Episode 6 had really done all that it was going to do. And we hadn't really developed a style as such. We were a great harmony band and we did a lot of covers. But really, we found ourselves kind of stagnating, and I felt like doing something else anyway. Loved the people in the band, I mean, great people.
The strange thing was that Roger Glover had never even heard Purple play, yet he instinctively knew that this was the right move to make.
I think I'd reached a feeling where Episode 6 had been knocking at the door of success for so long and it hadn't been opened, and it had reached a sort of conclusion, I think, in my mind. And so when this opportunity presented itself, despite my misgivings and my feelings of guilt about loyalty to the band, Episode 6, I instinctively knew it was the right move.
The legendary lineup was now complete, but there was still a lot of work to do. Neither the Book of Taliesin nor the Deep Purple albums made any impact in Britain during 1969, and subsequently the gigs were poorly paid. The band had to go to Germany, where their acceptance meant better venues and more money. Purple needed a homegrown hit desperately, and it came from an unlikely source. Derek Lawrence.
Once again, that was through Feldman's, Ben Nesbitt, with his connections with Sir Max Rain, who owned the Daily Express, I believe. And Malcolm Arnold was a friend of Ben's. So he got Malcolm Arnold to sit down with John and help him, teach him to arrange, basically. And Sir Max Rain's Daily Express were the sponsors. And that all came out of, once again, the Ben Nesbitt Feldman's contacts.
If the rehearsals for the Albert Hall date were punctuated by prima donna-like reactions from some Royal Philharmonic members outraged at performing with rock musicians, it was also noteworthy for the coming together of the band with a man who would play an enormous part in the future of Deep Purple, producer Martin Birch.
But I do remember there was a fairly violent reaction from the orchestra at the time, playing with this volume. That was the main problem. When the band came in, there were lots of, oh my God, we can't, not having any of that. But it actually worked out well. I think after the first kind of initial reactions of why are we playing with this rock band, I think once they started going through the pieces and rehearsing it, they actually enjoyed it. It was like a new venture, and this is good, this does work.
What the huge publicity generated by the Albert Hall concert achieved was the acceptance by the British public that Purple was a force to be reckoned with. The fact that a rock band had appeared at London's most prestigious venue with the country's most famous orchestra gave Deep Purple respectability and an unshakable aura. It also gave Ritchie Blackmore the chance to make his side of the bargain work. John Lord had got what he wanted. Now Ritchie could go full steam ahead with an out-and-out hard rock album.
Maybe dramatic is my style. I love dramatic music. Bach, Hendrix, Holst, Wally Roundhead, and so on. I'm just expressing my feelings at the time of playing, like any other musician.
The urgency for a new album was underlined by the rapid disintegration of Tetragrammaton in the USA due to gross profligacy. The label was bought by Warner's, and royalties that had been owing for some time were paid in full. Though this was great news for management and band, they both knew that cracking the UK in record terms was now the overriding priority. The band that British fans had shunned originally as gimmicky and middle of the road was now rapidly being seen as a hard rock outfit, worthy of much closer attention. To trail the new album, Deep Purple released a single that set the UK on fire.
Don't care, sit tight, maybe a
riff Blackmore played throughout Black Knight was borrowed from an earlier Ricky Nelson single, Summertime, and the band were amazed by the resulting sales. Roger Glover.
We finished Deep Purple in rock, and the management had said there's no single on it. And we said, well, we're not a singles band, we're an album band. Very proud in those days of our underground status, I suppose. But he insisted that we needed some kind of play track, and we went back in, and the story of how we wrote Black Knight is well known. It was a fairly liquid session, shall we say, and a novelty sort of song, really. We didn't really think much of it when we'd finished it, but Deep Purple in Rock came out, was very much a success, which was very nice, and we travelled to America to do the concerto at the Hollywood Bowl, and I believe it was there in the dressing room that we received a telegram saying that NME charts had Black Knight at number 29, and the next week it had shot up more, and by the time we got back to England it was a huge single, and it changed everything really. We did do Top of the Pops, and with good grace. I think we didn't plug our guitars in, that was our concession to how false it was.
Black Knight reached number 2 in the UK but failed to register in the USA, a complete reversal of their earlier efforts. But it also meant that Deep Purple would never again support any other band. Those days were gone. The publicity machine went into overdrive, and due to success of Concerto, John Lord became the spokesman, a position he perhaps could have done without. John Lord.
It was a kind of a strange thing that happened. Nobody in the band at that time, and which is surprising considering the band by then included Ian Gillan and Roger Glover, but nobody wanted to speak to anybody. So, I mean, I was always getting pushed to the front, you know, go on John, you tell him, you know, tell him lad. You know. So I ended up willy-nilly as the spokesman, whether I wanted it or not. And I'd not particularly wanted that position. But then, of course, a few months down the road, the rest of the guys in the band were kind of annoyed that I was the spokesman. So it was a lose-lose situation.
In Rock went to 4 in the UK album charts in June 1970 and became an instant classic. Roger Glover has always said it was the best album Purple ever made. Demand dictated that a new album was needed, and the band decamped to Cornwall to write songs. Recording had to fit into a hectic touring schedule as Purple embarked on their first official UK tour. Richie Blackmore's behaviour had always bordered on anarchy, both on and off stage, and sometimes the rest of the band found themselves in awkward situations, as Ian Pace recalls.
Back in those days, there weren't very many motorways on some of the trips you have to do, especially if you were going west. I mean, the M4 stopped round about Reading, and then you were on the A4 and going through these funny little towns, and it got pretty boring. And Richie used to recount tales back in the days of him being with the Outlaws, where they used to pass the time by hurting people, basically. One of his favourite tricks was they would drive up past a bus queue and with some carefully slipped bags of flour, just hurl them out the windows. Of course, as they drive by this queue of snowmen wondering where the snow had come from. He thought this was fun, and after, you know, back then it did seem a little humorous. But his other one was to get some very, very high power catapults and go buy 3 or 4 pounds of gooseberries when they're in season. And we found out these make amazing bullets. They really do go a long way, and they go very, very straight. And it's like, you know, it's terrible to relate now, but, you know, you'd go past a couple of guys digging a hole in the road, and as you go by, you want to get thwacked on the head with a gooseberry and start turning around belting his mate. Thought he'd hit him. It worked fine one day till it happened, and there was a traffic jam ahead of us, and they managed to work out what had happened. And these 2 great big guys with spades started running towards the car. Luckily, the traffic broke up before they got there. But it passed the time. I know it was naughty and everything, but I don't know. It seemed funny at the time. It still makes me chuckle when Mostly people didn't get hurt. They just sort of got very surprised when things thwacked around very close to them. I remember we got one window cleaner 2 weeks running. I think first week we were down in Bristol, next week we were down in Cardiff. Obviously it was the same route. And this poor guy was up his bloody ladder doing the windows. And 2 weeks running, he got thwacked with about 14 gooseberries as the car went by. He's been trying to work it out to this day what happened.
To coincide with a British tour, Purple released a single in February 1971. It was the only song they had managed to write in Cornwall, and the last single to make the UK top 10.
There once was a woman, a strange kind of woman, the kind that gets written down in history. Her name was Nancy, her face was never fancy. She left a trail of happiness and misery. I loved her, everybody loved her. She loved everyone and gave a good return. I tried to take her, I even tried to break her. She said I ain't for taking, won't you ever learn? I want you, I need you, I gotta be near you. I spent my money as I took my turn. I want you, I need you, I gotta be near you. Ooh, got a strange kind of woman. She looks like a
The new album was called Fireball. Some of the group thought it was a hodgepodge, while others, Ian Gillan in particular, felt it was a natural successor to In Rock.
I felt that the direction of In Rock, whilst it was exciting, wasn't nearly as much as the band could do. And it turned out that Fireball became not so much a natural successor to In Rock, but more of a springboard to Machine Head. And I think it expanded the confidence and the spectrum of the music of the band. I found it very exciting. It was challenging, and it laid the foundations, I think, for us to explore more than just the hard rock things.
golden light above you, show me where you're from. Magic in your eye, which is all you gaze upon. Stand up on your head and all the people all around you. I wonder where you're from, oh yeah, they wonder where I found you. All my love, it's a long way. Where you from, it's a long way.
In September 1971, Fireball was released in the UK. It went straight to number 1. Purple's concert at the Albert Hall in October that year was in part responsible for Rock subsequently being banned at that venue. It did their image no harm at all, and shortly after they were off to Montreux in Switzerland to record a new album. The event that shaped the album and led to what was to become one of the most memorable riffs in rock history can best be described by Roger Glover.
It's impossible to talk about Smoke on the Water without talking about Machine Head and the whole reason why Machine Head was made the way it was. During the making of Fireball, we'd been experimenting in the studio with getting a more live sound, and since our preferred home was on the stage rather than in the studio, we were striving to actually try and capture that on record. And to that end, we thought we'd record an album in a live setting on a stage. We looked around Europe, found a casino which was available. Our friend Claude Nobbs was there, and he said he could arrange a 3-week period where we wouldn't be interrupted. We could make our album. We booked the Rolling Stones mobile recording studio and arrived there to find there was one more gig to be played in the casino before we could move our equipment in, and that was a Frank Zappa and the Mothers show, which we were invited to. It was a matinee performance, and we went along. It was a great show. Sometime, about an hour into the show, someone fired a flare gun from the audience into the ceiling. It was a bamboo affair, a sort of fake ceiling. It didn't catch fire immediately, but it obviously started the fire. Everyone left the building, and basically it burned down. And it was a huge building. It was easily 9 or 10 stories high. It housed not only the casino and the venue that we were going to use, but restaurants and discos and bars and a convention centre. And it was a massive fire. Montreux, situated as it is by Lake Geneva, is a very peaceful, tranquil town. The lake stretches out. It's quite beautiful over the other side of the French Alps. And it's very serene. And the picture of this pall of smoke hanging over the lake was something that was to stay with us.
We all came out to Montreux on the Lake
Machine Head was released in April 1972 and would prove to be Deep Purple's biggest selling album. It gave Purple their first top 10 rating in the USA and became their second number one.
Nobody gonna take my car, I'm gonna race it to the ground. Nobody gonna beat my car, it's gonna break the speed and sound. Oh, it's a killer machine, it's got everything. I can drive the power, big fat tires and everything. I love it, and I need it, I need it. Yeah, it's a wild king, alright, hold tight. I'm a highway star.
1972 was a seminal year in Deep Purple's history. It was also the toughest in terms of touring. They completed 5 US tours and also stints in the UK, Europe and Japan, where their concerts would result in a fantastic live album. It was a must for all Purple fans and a fitting tribute to a band who'd spent 4 years on the road. The resultant sales were the biggest the band would ever achieve, and it was Made in Japan.
Well, we had a lot of convenience. We always had a ball on yeah. When people on the groove and people, we rock the band with smooth and more. We kept moving on the party alley. We stuck around the stars, yeah. Ow! Come on! Come on! Come on! Let's go, we're talking. Come on! Come on! Come on! Yeah, yeah, yeah. Remember when we did the food shopping? A pony drank a leather way. We moved to the Camaro Moonstone. Every number dance and sway. Got music in our solar system. We stuck in every day. Come on! Come on! Come on! Let's go, we're talking. Come on! Come on! Come on now!
As one tour ran into the next and country blurred into country, it was inevitable that strain took its toll. Richie came down with hepatitis just like Gillan the year before. Randy California took his place on several US shows after Al Cooper cried off. In that year, Deep Purple established themselves as the most successful rock band in the world and were given the dubious accolade by the Guinness Book of Records as the loudest. Richie Blackmore.
I do not think that Deep Purple became known to the public through sheer volume. That was just an easy target for the press to criticise. Did not like the band. I did notice that we were considered to be the loudest band in existence, according to the Guinness Book of Records. But that depends on how big the hall is where you were playing at the time. We played no louder than most of the other so-called big groups. It depends also on the PA and who is operating it at the time, apart from the fact I'm hard of hearing anyway.
To outsiders, everything appeared to be perfect, but internally, irreconcilable forces were beginning to emerge. John Lord.
Richie Blackmore and Ian Gillan was a marriage made in hell from day one almost. It was not apparent at first for the simple reason that everything was going so well. Ian's place in the band was secure by about 4 seconds in. I mean, he was just so right for the band. And Richie was among the first, of course, to recognise that. But there was a personal thing. They just didn't seem to like each other. And for some reason, it grew beyond just anything that one could deal with on the level of just simple dislike. That, to me, has been what's made Deep Purple. You know, it was that tension between Blackmore and Gillan.
Everything seemed to come to a head during the recording of Who Do You Think We Are? And this was apparent to Martin Birch.
The only noticeable thing would be that Ian possibly wouldn't come in to the sessions when Richie was doing his stuff, and vice versa. So Richie would do some solos, they'd lay the track down, Richie would perhaps stick some guitar on, and Ian, you wouldn't see Ian. And by the time it came to the vocals, Ian would come in with possibly Roger and do his vocals. And then Richie would appear at the end of the track when it was all finished and listen to it without Ian there. And that's how it worked. So there was never any confrontation that I saw, because that would have been destructive towards the actual making of the album.
Ian Gillan formally resigned from Purple in August 1972. Edwards and Coletta were devastated and determined to keep the news under wraps while the new album was finished. To some, success is everything, but to others, it leads to disillusion and a feeling that there's nothing new and they need to move on. Mark II Deep Purple were in trouble. After the abortive attempts at recording in Rome, the new album was completed in Frankfurt. One track in particular summed up the feeling between Gillan and Blackmore. Written by Gillan, the constant references to black suede, which Blackmore always wore, seemed to say it all.
Black suede don't mean you're good for me. Black suede just frames your mystery. I want to be inside of you. You're black, I don't know what to do. You're smooth dancer, and it's alright, 'cause I'm a freelancer. Never break me when you try to make it magical.
On November the 3rd in Oklahoma City, a nut fired a .38 Magnum at the stage, narrowly missing Ian Pace, serving only to heighten still further the tensions in the band. Ian Gillan.
We were all kids that had never experienced this before, even though we were pretty hard-nosed pros by then. We hadn't had to deal with things at this level. And at the time, you have to sacrifice a lot of your own personal integrity up to a point, doing things you don't want to do for the sake of the business, in quotes. And I think we were tired, we needed a break. But it all got pretty hairy, and we broke up. I left the band in June 73. And we got together a couple of times. I've always referred to Purple as like a marriage that sometimes went through some rocky patches. We split up a couple of times, but basically we stayed together for the sake of the kids. In the end, a permanent separation was the only answer.
The last album with the full Mark II contingent was released in March 1973 and is generally regarded, unsurprisingly, as their weakest. The frustration and exhaustion with the whole thing is quite apparent, and the title seemed to encapsulate the moment. Who do we think we are?
Flying to the rising sun, faces smile at everyone. Yeah, she is a whole new tradition. Ow, I feel it in my heart. My woman from Tokyo, she makes me see. My woman from Tokyo, she's so good to me.
Who Do We Think We Are made number 4 in the UK and number 15 in the USA, but now it was the turn of Roger Glover to question his future. He was being made to feel increasingly like an outsider in the band. Was this the result of his long-standing relationship with Gillan, or were there other internal differences?
Deep Purple was never a particularly frictionless band. There was always something going on. By the time we made Who Do We Think We Are, the relationships within the band had crumbled somewhat. Richie and Ian Gillan were not talking to each other, and rarely would you find all 5 of us in the same room at the same time. And it was popularly supposed that sooner or later Richie was going to leave and take Ian Pace with him. Ian Gillan had already announced his intention to leave. And so there was a feeling of doom about the band at that time. The next I heard about it was on tour in America. We'd sort of agreed to try and keep the band going despite Richie's imminent departure and Ian Gillan's. But during that tour, I think it was in Jacksonville, I certainly became aware of a coldness towards me from the others. I just didn't feel included anymore in discussions. There was no conversation directed my way, and it's little pointers like that that make you feel uneasy. And I finally pried it out of our manager then, Tony Edwards, in Jacksonville after a show. I went to his room and I said, "Look, what's up?" And he said, nothing's up. But I knew something was up, and I refused to leave his room until he told me. And basically he said that the deal was this, that Richie would stay in the band as long as I left. But they didn't want to tell me because they wanted me to complete the tour. So I handed in my notice, very sadly. I certainly don't want to be in a band that doesn't want me. And it was a very sad time, and the rest of that tour was uncomfortable. I went through many emotions.
The last concert together at Purple's second and greatest incarnation was at Osaka, Japan on June the 29th, 1973. Their last gig should have been the Cardiff Top Rank, which was cancelled. Strangely, this had been the last venue that Purple Mark I had played in 1969, which would truly have been a case of history repeating itself. If Ritchie Blackmore was the catalyst for the breakup, did John Lord see himself as the unfortunate man in the middle?
I think Ritchie has been painted too black sometimes. He's incredibly difficult to work with because he's so very single-minded. The rest of us had achieved a working relationship which was very open, very easy. But something was troubling Ian Gillan. And 6 months before he left, he actually wrote a letter of resignation, which he told us he was going to give in to the management. We were devastated. Ritchie, on the other hand, seemed pleased. Go figure. The best thing that had ever happened to us in our lives, and it was falling apart in front of us. I did my very, very best to make it work, but in the end I did have to wash my hands.
It was damage limitation time as far as the management were concerned. The Lord Blackmore Pace triumvirate, however, were already well advanced. In true Deep Purple style, they'd already found a bass player well before Roger announced his departure. Glenn Hughes had been playing with Trapeze and had been spotted at the Whiskey A Go-Go in LA. Furthermore, he had a great voice and saw himself in the lead vocalist role. Management of band had other ideas, and after being turned down by free vocalist Paul Rogers, they went the usual route of Melody Maker ads and were predictably snowed under. However, one applicant stood out a mile. David Coverdale was a sales assistant at a boutique in Redcar, and Purple invited him to come to London for an audition in August 1973. He passed with flying colours, or at least his vocals did. His appearance, however, was not to the group's liking. Overweight and cross-eyed, not to mention coming from up north and a poor taste in clothes, were some of the comments passed. Did Ian Pace think Coverdale was affected by this adverse criticism?
At that moment in time, no, he just wanted in, and who could blame him for that? I was the actual guy in the band who was listening to all the tapes being sent in by these wannabe singers, and David's tape basically was rubbish except for 4 bars where he actually sang hard, and I just thought there was something in his voice which was really good. I said, well, we'll get him down here, but he came down and he had these incredibly awful glasses on and this very, very, very strange sort of not quite long straight hair, and he had an eye that wandered around. I'm sure it was a nervous thing, and he was massively overweight. But we got him in the studio and he sang very well. But part of the deal was, if you're going to come in the band, you've got to look a bit different to that. Because he looked exactly what he was. A chap from a clothing store who really didn't give a toss about himself. He agreed to everything because, I say, he wanted in, and became the glorious David Coverdale that everybody knows and loves today.
The changes appeared to have little effect on Purple's career. The albums continued to sell by the boatload, much to the chagrin of Glover, since they were all tracks he had played on, but the new publicity photos showing the new lineup appeared to give others the credit. Deep Purple Mark III rehearsed their new songs at a stately home in Wales, Clearwell Castle, and then it was off to good old Montreux once again to record the new album. This new blood gave the whole band a fresh sense of inspiration, and everyone was well satisfied with the result. The public would get their turn when Burn was released the following year.
People are saying the woman is dead. She makes the burn with a wave of her hand.
Not having toured for 6 months, Purple embarked on a gentle warm-up tour in Europe. It was in the USA that the clamour for their return was the greatest. The tour there kicked off in March 1974, and this time the affluent Purple hired a Boeing 720 Starship 1 to ferry them around. As the album went top 10 in the UK and the USA, Purple crisscrossed America with groups like the Eagles and Emerson, Lake and Palmer supporting them. All went well until the California Jam concert at the Ontario Motor Speedway. There were contractual problems and Ritchie Blackmore problems, as John Lord recalls.
Yeah, Ritchie had a problem with something. In retrospect, quite rightly so. We were actually contracted to go on stage at sunset. So we would be the first band to use lights. However, the thing was run by ABC Television and they were running it extremely well. So everything else, actually, rather than running late, was running early. So it came time for us to go on and it was still 45 minutes or an hour to sunset. So Ritchie, ever the diplomat, locked himself in his caravan. You know, I'm not coming out, mate, was the extent of that diplomacy. And indeed he didn't. And they had sort of sheriffs banging on the door and all sorts of, American heaviness going down, and our management, of course, also running around like chickens with their heads cut off, and agents tearing hair. It was fascinating to watch, and I'd love to see it all over again. It would make a great movie. To the eternal credit, really, of Ritchie, it succeeded, and we went on at sunset.
These events really finished the ongoing relations between management and band. John Coletta had had enough and would never go out on the road with them again. Roadie Rob Cooksey took over the day-to-day affairs of the group, albeit on a salary basis only. But problems were now starting to build.
I've been mistreated. I've been abused. I've been struck down loaded, baby. I've been confused.
Glenn Hughes and Coverdale were now beginning to argue about who should be singing lead vocals, and the band went off to Clearwell to rehearse a new album, and it became apparent that Ritchie's mind was elsewhere. Apart from marriage problems, Ritchie was contemplating other options and seemed not to notice or care about the new move into funk initiated by Hughes and Coverdale. Furthermore, the company accountant Bill Reed was ordering everyone to leave the UK for tax reasons, which also served to increase tension. John Lord.
Yes, it was disconcerting to some extent to be told that you couldn't afford to live in the country of your birth legally, and that there was this kind of wonderful way of getting around it. Well, I mean, I actually didn't mind. I loved America. I was a great fan of America, and we toured there so much, and I got to love it even more through that. And we were told that we could all go and live in California, and it would be wonderful. And my first marriage fell victim to the move to America, and a lot of other things fell victim to it as well. And to all intents and purposes, I think by the time Ritchie decided to leave, the band was over. However, forces within the band, notably David and Glenn, felt, strangely as the new boys, that the band should carry on. They'd only been in it a couple of years, and they felt, that it had life left in it. I totally disagreed. To me, the band was damaged almost irrevocably anyway by Ian Gillan and Roger leaving. Although David and Glenn did a marvellous job, I still felt that the band wasn't the same, and to replace Ritchie seemed madness.
Like many expatriates, some group members didn't enjoy their enforced exile in the USA, and it only served to estrange them even more from their managers, who had chosen to live in Europe. Despite these difficulties and the ongoing Hughes-Coverdale vocal arguments, the new album was completed at the record plant in Los Angeles in mid-1974. To promote it, the band played several huge stadium gigs in the USA, including the Houston Astrodome and the Orange Bowl in Miami. Stormbringer was released in November and went to 6 in the UK and 20 in the USA.
Coming out of nowhere.
received mixed reviews and Blackmore's lack of input was evident. The vocal efforts were shared out, however, and Glenn Hughes came up with an excellent performance on this track, Holy Man.
Called to Madonna to give me a line. She said, Bob, what have you done? Passing your time with a holy man, talking of the moon and sun. But I can't tell the difference between the fool and wise. Show me a river to follow, away from all these lies. I've been on my own so long, don't you lend your hand. I've been picking up the bones too long, won't you understand?
In the music industry, one can always judge just how badly things are doing by the amount of solo projects a band's members undertake. In 1975, Ritchie Blackmore announced his new project, some of which would eventually end up on his first Rainbow album. Since both Lord and Hughes were similarly engaged, it didn't seem so important, but it was. Ritchie was going to leave, and the managers must have had an inkling of this since they had the last 3 concerts of the European Spring Tour filmed. For John Lord, this was the breakup.
I was shocked and stunned that anybody would really think that replacing Blackmore was an option. However, I went along with it, so somebody must have said something that convinced me. It certainly was nothing to do with money. We had plenty of money by that time, and more than any young chaps of our age could have any right to expect. So it must have been some way I was spoken to that made me say yes. Then I met Tommy Bolin, who was a delightful man. I mean, an absolute charming chap. I was very taken with him and agreed that I would carry on. In retrospect, I don't think it did Tommy any good whatsoever. I think he died as a result of it.
Perhaps at this point, Lord and Pace might have gone their own way, but David Coverdale was instrumental in finding a replacement for Ritchie. A young American called Tommy Bolin had found some success at home with the James Gang, and indeed Blackmore had cited him in a guitar magazine in 1974 as the guitarist to watch. After one jamming session, Bolin became lead guitarist in Deep Purple Mark IV, and legend has it came up with the title of the new Purple album, Come Taste the Band.
Keep on moving, far away, far away.
Come Taste the Band, while reaching 19 in the UK and 43 in the USA, was the least successful of all Purple albums since 1970. But nonetheless, the band with Bolin embarked on a Far East tour towards the close of 75. It was to be a tragically short relationship, which was compounded by more tragedy during a horrifying visit to Indonesia in December 75. Ian Pace tells the story.
Yeah, I was in bed. It was fairly middle of the morning, 9 o'clock, something like that, and I got a phone call from our tour manager, who was a German guy called Ozzy Hoppy, whose girlfriend's name was Barbie. And in my sort of semi-sleepy state, I thought he said, Barbie's dead. I went, oh Christ, his girlfriend's dead. What he actually said was Patsy's dead. The story filtered through that basically he got into some sort of ruckus with 2 very, very nasty Indonesian chaps who'd basically slung him down an elevator shaft. Patsy, God bless him, got out to the bottom of the shaft and managed to walk to the front door asking for an ambulance, but died in hospital.
As if this wasn't enough, the Indonesia trip also exacerbated Bolin's drug problems. He injected himself with impure heroin and became incapable of playing effective lead guitar. Back in the States, everyone tried to help Bolin kick the habit, but with little success. 1976, and the touring never let up. In the USA, things with Tommy went quite well considering, but as the band started the British leg of the tour, things deteriorated rapidly, and John Lord explains why.
Tommy found it awfully difficult to deal with the constant barracking of the British audiences. Blackmore was a hero over here, and he didn't understand that. I tried to make him see the good side, in that he was going down well. People were actually applauding his ability. And with very, very cruel hindsight, people now, of course, write into the internet saying, what a wonderful man he was and what a great asset he was to the band. I wonder if some of those writing in are the people who were actually yelling for Blackmore at the time. It's difficult to know. Tommy found that awfully confusing, along with the fact that he was confusing himself anyway with his drug problem. And it got to the last gig, in fact, which was the Liverpool Empire. And I came off stage, and I bumped into Ian Pace as we came off stage. And it burst out of me. I said, "Ian, that's it. I've had enough." And he said, "That's real funny. I was about to tell you the same thing."
The group were also back in the familiar territory of warring factions. Hughes sided with Bolin against Lord, Pace and Coverdale, and this time it showed in public. The Empire Pool at Wembley was a disaster. The last show at the Liverpool Empire can best be described by manager Rob Cooksey, who said, "It had got to the point where Tommy was starting to send up Deep Purple's music on stage to parody it. Watching that last show, I just knew that John and Ian were going to walk off stage, get into their cars, and drive away from Deep Purple forever."
She was a two-punch dancer, a blue-eyed gypsy queen. She always had an answer for what she'd done and where she'd been. Afraid to get late at midnight, for all around to see. She spoke with words of wisdom, and this is what she said to me. Make it look.
8 years brought superstardom and colossal record sales, from rented flats to sumptuous mansions. Did Lord and Pace really think it was all over?
I think at the back of our minds, we all really knew that if it was given another shot with the 5 personalities that actually created all the real mega success, we could have fun. But I don't think we ever really gave it up, not in our own minds.
8 years of doing your own thing normally leads to serious introspection, and there was a lot to think about. Tommy Bolin had died inevitably from drugs, and a bogus Deep Purple was started up by Rod Evans until an injunction stopped them dragging the name of Purple through the mud. Coverdale had formed Whitesnake and was actually joined by Lord and Pace for a time, and Glenn Hughes had reformed Trapeze. Then in 1984, John Lord had a revelation. He realized that Purple fans were still alive and missing them. Furthermore, American Bruce Payne, who had been their US representative in the 70s, had now taken over their management. Whether the rumour of each band member being offered $2 million to reform was rubbish or not, the resulting record proved 2 things. The band still sounded great, and the fans put them back where they belonged, in the charts. This title said it all.
Can you remember my name? As I flow through your life, 1,000 oceans I have flown. Spirits of ice.
The album Perfect Strangers by Deep Purple Mark II, or was it 5, made number 5 in the UK and 17 in the USA, and the inevitable world tour took the band through to 1985. After 8 years, how did it feel to be back together again on the road? More to the point, with Richie around, how did Gillan feel?
Well, I felt great. At that time, I was very wary about it, the same as everyone else was. I mean, how do you get back together again, and how do you deal with the fact that the world has changed? After not much thinking, it became obvious, just get on and do what comes naturally. Needless to say, we'd all been through some other experiences in the meantime, so the texture of the personalities had changed somewhat.
After a lull of 11 years, it was a surprise to find Purple releasing a single, especially in the USA. Knocking at Your Back Door may not have been a huge hit in the States, but it made the industry and fans alike realize that legends just don't die and go away. To capitalize on this new awareness, a double compilation album was released in July entitled The Anthology, and it duly charted in the UK. The first half of 1986 found the band in the studios recording a new album. To coincide with its release, Purple set off on a European tour in January 1987, which was notable for Ritchie Blackmore's refusal to play Smoke on the Water. What did Roger Glover make of this?
We made Perfect Strangers, and it was a wonderful album to make. There was a great feeling of camaraderie in the band. And the first gig we played live in front of anyone after 11 years was in Perth. It was great to get on stage and play. We were all a bit nervous, and Richie didn't do the encore that very first night, and we went on and did it without him because we were so fired up and so happy to be playing again. I suppose that set the seal for the rest of our relationship with Richie. Every time he didn't want to play Smoke on the Water, we didn't always go on and do it without him, but frequently we did, and it bothered us less as time went on.
The House of Blue Light album charted on both sides of the Atlantic despite Richie's eccentricities, and the same year saw the live recording of an album which will be released in July '87. Called Nobody's Perfect,
You lazy, stay in bed. You lazy, yeah, stay in bed. You don't want no money, you don't want no bread, no. If you
by 1989 the same old ills were affecting the band as Gillan quit, or did he? Citing musical differences as the main reason. Differences with whom? Was it Richie?
In 1989, I was actually fired from the band. I didn't quit this time. I was about to quit, but they got in first. It was pretty much Richie and I that were at loggerheads. I was kind of distressed at just the general attitude towards things. I felt that Purple wasn't maximising its potential. I also felt that we were becoming non-directional. There was a definite pulling in opposite poles.
To replace Gillan, the remainder of Purple turned to an ex-Rainbow vocalist, Joe Lynn Turner. The apparent smoothness with which this was done says much for the band's adult approach and their manager, Bruce Payne. With the new lineup came a new album in 1990. Called Slaves and Masters, it hit both the UK and USA charts at the end of that year, and the band began rehearsals for the attendant tour in Florida. As the tour launched in January 1991, so did Saddam Hussein's Scud missiles.
That whole period, the Slaves and Masters period, is not a period I particularly care to dwell on much. We found ourselves, or I found myself, in a predicament from which I could not extricate myself, and found that I thought Joe Lynn Turner, when he did the audition, was actually very good. Joe Lynn Turner was the only one that actually showed any real spark and inventiveness, and I really thought he'd found himself, but I think he hadn't really. I still think he's a very good singer in his genre. But that whole album was certainly done with the best will in the world, and I think if you listen to the album without any prejudices, it's not such a bad album. There's some nice moments on it.
A single from the Slaves album was released in the UK in March 1991 and reached 57. But as the group swung into their American tour, personnel problems flared yet again. 14 dates were cancelled as Turner departed, somewhat acrimoniously. 1992, Ian Gillan. Yes, here he was again, making the analogy of remarriage several times over with regard to Deep Purple.
Well, it's an overused word now, it's spiritual value, but when something like Purple has been so strong over the years, it develops an entity, and it is bigger than any of the individuals in the band. You get to realise that as you develop a little humility. That was it really, and in the end Richie kind of couldn't take it anymore, so he left. Then we had to make a big decision whether to carry on or not. It was a very important time in our career because Richie was a founder member, and in a lot of people's eyes, a vital element that we couldn't do without. When I say vital, I mean absolutely vital. But that has sort of left aside the feelings of 4 other people who were deeply wrapped up and in love with the band. So we thought we'd see how it went. So we got Joe Satriani in to deal with things, and picked up from there pretty well.
1992 was recording time as Purple worked on a new album. The Battle Rages On was released in mid-July 1993, and the band set off on a grueling 69-date world tour, opening in Missouri. A live album from concerts in 1993 was released in November 94 due to a lack of original material. Come Hell or High Water contained many of the old favourites, and its release was probably due to another major upheaval that had struck Deep Purple during the 94 tour. Gillan had made his point on several occasions, but this time it was Ritchie Blackmore's turn, as Ian Pace recalls.
Got the point where if Ian maybe forgot a word, Ritchie just stopped playing, look at it. So Ian would go, well, if you're not going to play, I'm not going to sing. I mean, it's a lot harder for a guy with just his voice and a microphone to get cover than it is for a guy with a guitar to stop, knowing there's drums and bass and keyboards to cover it up. And so Richie thought it was Ian not singing, but Ian wasn't going to sing because Richie wasn't playing.
During the 1994 tour, the Japanese promoter suggested 3 names to replace Blackmore. They were Michael Schuller, Jeff Beck and Joe Satriani. Initially, Satriani got the job, but by the close of the year, a more permanent member had been found in ex-Dixie Dregs guitarist Steve Morse. In 1995, EMI released a digitally remastered In Rock with 6 bonus tracks, some remixed like Flight of a Rat. 1996, and the Deep Purple Fireball Anniversary Edition was released, commemorating 25 years and over 40 million sales worldwide. The Perpendicular Tour covered 130 dates, and EMI and Roger Glover even discovered a previously unissued track, Slow Train. 1997 saw the release of a great live album featuring many of the old favourites entitled Live at the Olympia. September that year also saw the remastering of the great Machine Head album, guided by the capable hands of Roger Glover. However, by the end of the year, Deep Purple Mark VI went back into the studios to start recording a new album. How did John Lord and the rest of the band feel after a quarter of a century plus? Has the smoke on the water settled?
I think the most important thing about playing as Deep Purple now, after nigh on 30 years, is that we are still producing new music. I think if we were just doing the rounds as a nostalgia act, I don't think any of us could bear it. We are, however, making new music. We have a guitarist who's filled Richie's shoes admirably well. We are expected even by our fans to make new music and not to just tour the old tracks. So I feel rather good about it. I feel blessed. I feel a little bit humbled that the fact that we actually managed to stick around this long and still sell records and sell concert tickets. I don't think I could have picked a better career if I'd tried.
Smoke on the water.